I'm super excited to have the opportunity to talk to you about a topic that I have become very engaged in from a design perspective and a policy perspective, which is digital offboarding for the elderly. And the whole point of the conversation today is that I will present you this challenge space that we are entering here, from all kinds of disciplines, from the service designers to the policymakers, but also the software developers and everyone. And please know that I will be more than happy to engage with you throughout this lecture. I'm actually not such a fan of lectures where you sit and just absorb and me just spitting things out and dropping onto you. So please do use the chat room with comments and questions right away. You can also open the microphone. I'm totally happy with you interrupting and engaging me in this, or engaging us, I hope. And what I want to do first is to start you off with a video that students of the Polytechnical Summer School have produced in June when I worked with them on this topic of the issues of digital technologies, elderly, and the life cycle. And please bear with me for a second, because the beginning, is a bit fast and it's a bit kind of like, whoa, what's coming at me? But bear with me and just see what happens as we go along. And that will be our first step into this conversation today. And I think it sets nicely the tone. Working?
Yeah. Life is hard for little Jimmy. He is still working at the age of 72 with no plans of retiring in the foreseeable future. The last 4 world economic crises in a row did not help either. This old fella will not give up. No, sir. He survived both world wars, third and fourth, and though his ex-husband left him and took his floating car and his kidney, he's thriving in life. One day, old Jimmy was eating his lunch.
Rice is terrible!
When boom! Coronavirus Sigma Delta Omicron per se, the third rocket power Pepsi Cola Morimoto struck the world with a new pandemic lockdown situation.
Oh!
Leaving old poor Jimmy all alone, unattended, lonely, lonesome, depressed. Not! Now, with the metaverse, pandemics are just a thing of the past. The public sector is able to provide Jimmy with everything he needs. From remote healthcare,
Doctor, do I need a second prostate exam?
to good old human interaction.
And I said, that's not a bag of beans, that's my wife!
All Jimmy needs is his meta waypoint and his meta me, which is his new state-of-the-art digital identity, which basically is a digital blockchain encrypted copy of his persona and biometrics, capable of functioning as his birth certificate, passport, real-time medical history, fiscal code, payment methods, Gardaland FastPass, and death certificate. Yep, this is an inclusive, multi-purpose, easy-to-use system, nothing can ever go wrong with it. But what if Jimmy needs urgent medical checkups but doesn't understand his meta waypoint? Death! But what if Jimmy's arthritis spreads and he's unable to use a phone? Death! But what if the blockchain has been compromised?
Stolen.
Death! But what if Jimmy's high-risk job as professional bear fighter changes his biometrics and can authenticate the meta-me identity? Death! But what if Jimmy can't pay his electricity bill, preventing him from accessing the metaverse? Death! What if? That is the million-euro question. To be inclusive means to design for the average person or for everyone and everyone. How can unforeseen changes in the life of a person render useless a common service? Is it possible to really design for everyone? Or is it just a designer's fantasy?
So thank you for bearing with me and watching this, but it really is a nice study by students who, by the way, were asked to envision what it would mean for them to be elderly and to cope and to use public services, and how that would work and how that would be. And that's where we are at the topic for today's lecture, which is about, can you see it now, by the way? Yes, quickly. Yeah. Which is about digital offboarding for the elderly. And what I would try to do is to introduce that as a topic into our research and work for designers, for policymakers, because right now, as you will see, we are so busy with getting everybody on board that we're beginning that we're not really seeing what actually is happening on the other end, or we're at least not worrying about it yet. And I think it's time to do that. That's the conversation that I would like to have with you today. So I am very much approaching this research as part of my project on voice assistants, people, experiences, practices, and routines. That's an SNF-funded project where we work with 18 people, roughly a team of transdisciplinary people, on what does it mean to live with voice assistants, where are they going, what do they do with us, what can we do with them, and how do they intervene and interfere with life, how do they support us. And so I just want to position that as part of that project, because that is where we started to also see this idea that when voice assistants are being introduced, they always come in as problem solvers. Everything works smoothly, everything is fine. But in reality, when people live with these voice assistants, there are a lot of disruptions. There are a lot of situations when it's not very helpful to use them. And when you extend this further into the whole technology with the elderly, then you're beginning to see some kind of gaps emerging here that are really not spoken about right now, that are really not explored very much, because there's so much effort to underline and emphasize the good that this technology can do. And by the way, I agree, there's a lot of good that can be done. There's no attempt here in this kind of presentation or research to say like technology is bad, or we shouldn't do that. What I would like to do, and what I would like to encourage us as especially this interdisciplinary research group that brings together these different skills in public services, service design and policy, to actually start to think about like, okay, and how can we then make this a complete life cycle experience that doesn't just like at some point cause problems because we haven't anticipated them and we haven't addressed them in time. So just to give you an idea how we work in this VA Pepper project, you can see we're working all along with the technology. We're looking into the actual technology issues, in the data issues. We're looking into how do people actually, in an ethnographic way, experience and use these kind of devices. And we're also speculating and going out into the future, which is exactly where this kind of cross-section of the digital offboarding is also situated at. So when we talk about speculative design, this is when we push and pull people, similar to what the students have just done, where we say like, okay, now how far can we push this? What gets us, into a discomfort zone, or what gets us into a more comfortable situation? This device here, for example, we have developed to put right next to the voice assistants in the homes of people, and it's a device that constantly shows you in type what the voice assistant is hearing. And that's kind of like, of course, an interesting exercise, because most people aren't aware that the voice assistants are listening all the time, or what they could hear all the time. And so we did a couple of studies around that. But anyways, this is just a context to give you where I situate this work, and also where this digital offboarding is now becoming also a part of the research focus in terms of understanding what the implications are from a user perspective, from a policy perspective, but also from a public service perspective. Just to show you, this is kind of like the moment when it became clear there is an issue here, when we have the situation that as time goes by and as we age, the technology, of course, gets smarter and smarter, and we there are already terms about de-skilling people because some of the common tasks are being taken on by the machines or by these devices. And then the question is, what learns, who learns? And the more the machine learns, it appears the less people are learning, which again goes back into this de-skilling kind of situation. But the question then was, okay, what happens? How does this go on? And since my interest is very much in public services in general, this was the starting point. It's very interesting. I just took a snapshot from, when you do a Google search on digital aging in the digital era, and you do a Google search and you get these kind of little pictures and summaries of studies. It's very interesting to see that there is everything about onboarding and about keeping people on board, so to speak, in these kind of digital services. There is a focus on care, digital equity. This is an interesting term, by the way, because digital equity does mean that people, all people, and especially also elderly and senior people, are included and have access, like everyone else, to these digital services and these digital social media tools. And I think digital equity is a really interesting term now when we talk about digital offboarding, because there is a digital equity and there is an equity overall that is maybe in the analog, but it's an equity to become or stay part of community, society, and have access to all information and services. And it's interesting how we're starting to have a conversation about digital equity and other equities, because that, I think, is already a bit of an indicator that we need to start worrying about the issue overall. Also very interesting, when you look at these different studies, you will find that the seniors or the elderly are usually described as people of 60 plus, maybe 65 plus, but there are very, very few studies or insights about users that are past 70 or past 80. And that's a big challenge. You can see how that elders are. I mean, like when you're 80, you're probably not job hunting online. You may be finding and reading digital newspapers, maybe using telehealth, but I mean, a lot of those offers that are really targeting the elders or describing the elders online are really targeted towards what will become more and more middle age, really. There is a bunch of studies that are finding that all together, the research findings suggest that information communication and technology interaction does positively influence the quality of life of elderly people. And again, don't mistake my rather critical or my inquiry here as someone who says like that's not the case. There are many benefits to it, but the question I ask is, when do these benefits stop, and what do we do to bring the people who may have been growing up now in this digital environment, being very comfortable in this and positively influenced by this kind of digital development. But what happens when, for some reason or another, they fall out of it? And when at that time, fast forward, our world has become so dependent on digital services, and in particular digital public services, then how do we catch that again? And how do we provide for that situation? This is a group here I know in the room that is quite aware of the public sector and the pressures on the public sector. But I just want to reiterate the retirement wave across Europe, really, but also in the US. But we have a situation where in the public sector, the public services are currently provided by people who already struggle because they're usually understaffed and really already on their edge. And yet within the next 6 to 8 years in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, about 40 to 60% of those people who are already struggling to fulfill the mandates for these public organizations and the public services, they will disappear because they will be retiring. And the public sector struggles to hire young people, even though luckily with the corona and everything else, it's gotten better again. The public sector is being of interest again to young people. But I have heard, and I'm afraid I can't give you the exact source, but I will try to hunt it down again. But I have heard someone saying that in Germany, for example, even if all of the young people today would enter into the public service, it would not be enough to cover the demand. And that would mean that nobody does computer science or I don't know, informatics or something else, hospital. Just all. I mean, hospital is public health, but you get the picture. At the same time, we have an aging population, which means that we know that we have an increase demand on the population, on the public services, and we know that we have to provide better and more services. Budget cuts, then you have an additional major crisis. You know, the pandemic is kind of in recession right now, but then you have the flu, then you have something else. You can also talk about, like, worldwide. I mean, California right now is in a climate induced very, very serious situation where the public service also has to help. And of course, we have the digital transformation in the public service, which is where the organizations, the internal systems often struggle with, because it's an area that has been neglected for a long time in many governments, not so much in the Nordic countries, I believe, but we feel it very much in the German, Austrian, and Swiss area, Germany in particular. And of course, there is this continuous demand on citizen-centric services. So all of that accounts for a very interesting and very tense situation for the public sector. And of course, that with the digital transformation means we need digital public services. It's in our own interest to have digital public services where we can provide the same service standards and the same services that we have today with fewer staff, lower costs, but we can also develop better ones, more tailored ones, actually create new ones that haven't even been thought of right now, to really better serve a population. And of course, this comes together with the ability that has shown very much in the COVID time, that we can now use evidence-based and data-driven services using these technologies. So there's a lot of benefit in that kind of world, and that also means that we are definitely heading towards that which is a digital public service landscape. And just out of curiosity, I did a little bit more research, and I know from municipalities here in Switzerland that have already started to buy real estate in the metaverse, just in case, because they realize this is real estate and it's going to be more expensive if they wait to buy in 5 years. So they wanted to buy it now, so that they can have a real estate that they can maybe do something with it, or maybe just sell. And you can see the management consultancies like Ernst & Young, they are already betting on public services in the metaverse. And that is really something that we need to keep in mind as we think about this digital landscape. I found this other thing that you see on the bottom of the screen here, which was a very interesting side note that I wanted to share with you too, because what does it mean if there is no tax on a real estate anymore? There's no land rate on the metaverse. And so, public services such as garbage collection. So there's no monthly electricity, no water bills. That's a bit away, it takes us a little bit away from this digital offboarding topic that I'm focusing on today. But I wanted to share that thought with you too, because I think that's something that we seldom have on our forefront when we start talking about digital public services. So just to reiterate, here is a really good lecture or literature, but it's unfortunately only in German language. It's called the E-Government Monitor, and it's published every year by the initiative D21. It's free, you can download it. I added a couple of English headlines here just to make it more understandable. But really, this is a slide out of their latest report that just says these are the demands on the public services by people, in kind of like in order, and not surprisingly, to pay the income tax is pretty much the strongest one, or the heaviest use, and then making an appointment, and then change residency address, but also a number of certificates like birth certificates, marriage certificates, and that kind of stuff. I won't go too much into detail, but I'm just sharing that because it gives a bit of an idea where the public services are demanded. And in this chart, you can see already the difference between online and offline. The thick line is the online, and the thinner or more shaded version is the offline. So you can also see how in some areas these things are already shifting. However, this report is always worried that not enough people are using public services online. And it's also always, so far, every year, commenting on the lack of public services being offered by the public organizations. In other words, they still emphasize also that we're in this phase of onboarding. So there's a focus of how do people get online, how do they use services, what kind of services should we offer. The same with these groups that we had here, digital public participation. It's a workshop I was participating in or co-organizing for the Creative Bureaucracy Festival about, 3 years ago now, 2.5. Digital public participation is a very important aspect. And I think that we think digital public participation, we really have to also start to think about digital public offboarding, and because that's kind of like the middle, the beginning, the middle, and the end of public participation. You cannot stop public participation when people no longer can use digital tools. You may or may not know, but I think in the Nordic countries too, this is a trend. Here in Brazil, in the Ministry of Economics and Finance, they have had for the past, let me think, more than 5 years, 6 years, a special department for digital user experience, where they ensure that these kind of tools that other ministries and government agencies develop are suitable for everyday people to use and to function. And so again, it's just underlining this trend. We are in this digital public service experience, and we will not get out of it. And there's good reasons for that. But when you see this here, this is a statistic I found on Norway. And nicely, they, if you look at the age group on the right-hand side, they have asked people from 61 years to 100 years, which is very rare. And you can see that, the people, that many of those people hardly ever use these online services. I don't know what the shift is in the numbers. I don't know how many 100 years they have asked, and how many 60-year-olds. But the interesting thing about these kind of statistics is that they tend to convey to us that this is a temporary problem. I'm sharing here a very personal picture from my family. You see my niece, who is 14, my mom 74, my husband 55, and my grandmother 94. And much of the literature and the attitudes that we have in the world are that, yeah, my grandmother, who didn't even have a telephone in her house until she was 75, that's a generation that we don't have to worry about this problem anymore in the future, because my niece, she's 14, she's so digital. And then by the time that she's 74, like my mom is now, she'll be so well versed in all these digital tools and softwares that there is no problem and everything is fine, and we don't have to worry about offboarding at all. But there's a bit of a caveat, and that is that if public services are available online only, and you see that there is a bit of and by the way, this is not a scientifically completely accurate depiction of the life learning curve. This is me kind of like making a point here, first of all, because I haven't had the time or the ability to attach to concrete numbers yet. But we all know that we have a technology adaptation that is very easy and fast when we are young. But then at some point, like, about 60, this is what the most of the research says. So about 60, we're the elderly, and somehow we start to struggle with things. Yeah, and then we become actually less and less able to handle systems updates and software changes and new tools and everything else. And that is the point of why we should be thinking about this digital offboarding. Again, with students here in Haslu in Switzerland, I've explored what does it mean to do this digital onboarding. And you have to think about the digital world as something where we first have to either be born into, like my niece maybe, but she still needs some kind of understanding of digital onboarding. And the interesting thing about digital onboarding too is that it's not a one-time thing, as we often are believed or made to believe. Digital onboarding is something that is iterative and continues lifelong. You just need to think about, the last couple of days. Where did you have struggles with software? Where was there a software update? Where was there a new program? You constantly have to be onboarded, and we need to understand that this is not something that is a one-time thing, but keeps going. And then when we talk about the digital offboarding, that is the problem when people no longer can actually stay on the road. And let me just tell a few stories. And actually, I'd be very interested in hearing some of your stories also in the chat. Think about, a person who is starting to order 3 times the same book from Amazon because she has forgotten that she actually ordered it already. Not everything's fine. Amazon makes money. She's happy to spend the money. She's happy to click on the books, but there's no protection for this person that helps her understand that I already got these books. I mean, she anyways, we have these guardian protections for children, but we don't have anything for the elderly in the current stage. Think about when you go to the metaverse and you saw that Ernst & Young are really pushing for that, and they're not the only ones. And then think about the video that I showed you in the beginning. What can happen when we are in this metaverse and all of a sudden you can no longer access this world for whatever reason? And there are many reasons that are as simple as we have an energy crisis and I can't afford to pay the electric bill. So what happens then, and how do we start to think about that other side of this digital service? Somehow. And just to reiterate that the same group that did the video and other students there in Polytechnico, I asked them to, and they're 25 on average, to remember or to write down all the software tools, digital apps and devices that they're using today, that was in June last year, and that they did not know of 5 years ago and haven't used 5 years ago. And this, of course, is not even complete. But this is just to give you an idea. And then I asked the very same students to think about fast forward, think about you, because you're now 25, but if you take it 5 years further, what happens? And another 5 years further, and what happens? And the reality is that technology never ever stops. And so this idea that, the generation of my mom and my grandma will somehow be, once they leave our world, that somehow we have solved this problem of, digital and the elderly. I don't think that holds a lot of water, because I think we will all come to this kind of situation where at some point developments are going on, we're not able to cope with them anymore. And that is why I encourage you to think with me, to think about how can we address this situation now, and think along with it. For that, I think I'm running out of time. Is that what I'm being told? Nope. There is a story. Thank you, Jonas. Yeah. And so anyways, yes, please share these stories in the chat. But I think you get the point that I'm trying to make here, and I really want to use this talk to bring you into this kind of fold, and to start a conversation, and also maybe research around this topic. Because what we can see right now is that the process of aging is hardly addressed. So even when you look at these research issues, you will find that they always talk about age almost as a static kind of thing, the elderly. And then we have a solution for the elderly. Yeah, but the elderly don't stay the elderly in this way. 5 years down the road, they are very different. And how do we accompany that journey with these digital services? For me, being worried about the public service in general, because I really truly believe that is something where we have to worry in order to secure democratic institutions, secure trust in governments, make government function, make society function. Public services have a tremendous role in that. And so how do we secure and guard this kind of role in this digital development? And how do we then pay attention to those digital public services in a way that we don't enter into some or that we don't lose that which makes public services so valuable? So that is also the other thing that you're starting now nicely in the chat. Digital solutions, my critique is that they tend to be presented as reliable. When you see all these commercials for the elderly, so there's always this like, oh, look at this elderly couple, and here they have this digital care, and here's the telemedicine, and everything works fine. It does work fine when it works. But when it doesn't work, it can be catastrophic to the point. And what people also don't understand is this aging demographic of society. Right now, in our studies that we're doing on onboarding, it's always a child, a grandchild, someone in the relatives, some close friends who helps the elderly to get something done. But we are beginning to be more and more a society where people are lonely and alone. And how do we then cope? Who's picking up that role? Does that also mean that the public service offers something differently for us? Are there new policies that are helping us with different situations? Anyways, these are the kind of thoughts that I wanted to plant this morning with you. And really leave it with digital offboarding as a real challenge, and that the time to design for it is now. And that is really all for me. And I did talk a lot, but I really appreciate all of you starting to share your stories in the chat, because that's what we can have a conversation around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabine. And I think we have plenty of time to have this discussion in this forum. And I've seen that there are some stories that have been presented in the chat. And it's about people that are seeing this in their lives as well, or in their grandparents' lives and parents' lives. And Oscar also said that it's not just elderly, also people with disability and low income use internet and devices to a lesser extent.
Yep. And Oscar, you're absolutely right. And the interesting thing is, of course, that the public service workers that or the service experts that I work with are fully aware of that. They take that as their responsibility now. They have always taken that on because they know that it depends, right? But about 20% on average of a municipality or of a city or community that they are responsible for, about 20% of these people literally can't deal with these digital services or even some other, even right now kind of analog services, but they need special kind of care. What this points to is, though, that maybe we have to expand that group as we think about the digital offboarding, and maybe we have to link those kind of concerns and efforts and bring that together. And I think there's real opportunity for us as designers, policymakers, public servants, public managers to work together on exploring and understanding where these connections are and what kind of solutions we could start to think of, how we can also structure the system in such a way that there is I like to use fingers for my visuals, where we can connect this back. And there's a hand up. I see Fergus.
Yeah, I hope it's okay to ask a
Absolutely.
question. Sabine, thank you so much for this. I'm super curious about many aspects of what you presented, but something that struck me as well is the focus here almost entirely on the elderly.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, actually, you have that wonderful picture of your family. And I'm just thinking about this problem at a more systemic level. Why do we not have these near relationships? Sorry, that was a bit Finglish, close relationships with our elderly relatives, and hence the need for them to do this stuff for themselves digitally or otherwise. And I was just wondering how much of this futurizing and these sorts of scenarios or thinking about this problem, and particularly at a policy level, you've looked at restructuring the family group or those relationships and actually shifting the focus away from the elderly and putting it back on, I'm thinking about unpaid care. You mentioned that statistic in Germany as well about the idea that everyone would have to be doing public sector work if it was to become sustainable. Well, that's unpaid labor that's happening in many households in various different forms. And perhaps the whole idea of public services all along has been to offboard that responsibility so that people can go out and work or live a more individualistic, self-actualizing life. So I was just super curious about that dimension of the problem, to sort of shift the focus away from the elderly for a while and think about what other bits of the system we could change that would actually allow us to help our elderly relatives with these sorts of things, instead of the digital doing that part of the job, and maybe allow the digital to focus on the things it can do well, as opposed to trying to make it solve everything.
I like your thinking very much, and it's that kind of thinking that I also want to trigger and spur with this conversation. I focus specifically on the digital offboarding of the elderly because I think it's a good way to kind of push the buttons, so to speak, and to trigger exactly those kind of conversations. Now, I'm enough versed with the public service and public organizations and also policy making that I know that literally we don't have the human capacity to provide the kind of services that we need to have this kind of human rights, human dignity, participation in society, and so on. So that is really my starting point for that from the organizational perspective, because I see that this organizational problem is one that is at the heart of how we live as a society, how we the kinds of societies we can sustain. But you're of course very right that there's this side of the human element of bringing in new perspectives, and I see that this is happening actually. I mean, again, Corona and pandemics, there has been a lot of thinking that has changed amongst young people. There's a lot more young people now willing to go into the public sector because they understand and recognize that there is something of value here that we cannot afford to lose. And a bit of my effort here too is to we hear probably a little bit on average an older age group, but when I work with students, I need to make sure that they understand that's their problem now. If they don't act now, they will be the one on the other end receiving. They have a chance to design now. They have a chance to engage now. So that and that includes these kind of human relations aspects that you have, that you pointed out. But the reality is we are fewer and fewer young people and more older people. So even if you try to map this, it's not going to work. We will need to have a digital component in there. I'm very, very convinced that that's not something we can do away with, despite all the personal relationships that we are able to maintain and build.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking even as simple as the pandemic has showed us that we can all work from home a lot more than perhaps we thought. And we're using digital tools to allow us to work at home, which means that if my elderly mother is in the next room and needs more constant care, I can perhaps combine that more with my working life because my work is digital and I'm being onboarded in another context that actually allows me to provide a lot of that support. So it's a flipping round of the idea of the voice assistant doing it and I'm in the office. It's I'm here at home. So I suppose that was more what I was thinking about. What other things can we actually change amongst the able-bodied or the technically aware or whatever is a more politically correct way to group that, the people who don't need these services. And thinking about those dimensions as well as all the ones that we're otherwise talking about as well.
Well, thanks, Fergus. And I have a question from Gerolf in the chat. How can we do research in this domain? Lots of ethical challenges around vulnerable groups. Absolutely right. So there will be a lot of questions that we have to explore and answer. I can tell you that we have also started in the VA Pepper project to explore those kind of issues, not so much with the elderly yet, but generally the broader issue of what happens when you do research in an intimate space at the home, that involves data, vulnerabilities, and so on. We have started to explore ways of non-intrusive research methods, remote research methods, and so on. If you talk about methodological approaches, but we have also an understanding that these kind of stories, I think, are the ones that qualitative research is a powerhouse. Just like what you just say in the chat, that's all data, and it's data that exists, and somehow we can collect such data. And we can make a case for it. And I think when we do that, then we can also begin to understand how what the next steps in the research are. I don't have all the answers yet. I have a challenge, and I have an issue. I have core basic research methods that we can again approach some of these aspects, but the vulnerabilities will always be there. And if anything, that's exactly why we should get so engaged in it. Because again, when you saw the metaverse, and when my students were doing this video in June 2020, I don't think they were aware that Ernst & Young is already selling the real estate and making a push for it. I don't think that they put that together at this stage. I may be doing them some disservice here, but the reality is that there are some key business interests that are pushing for that. And again, there can be a win-win, but how do we cope with that? And how do we protect people in this metaverse? And that's again where I feel like policy needs to come together with design, with the public management. And by the way, quick spiel or a commercial session here. I am co-organizing a workshop for the CHI conference in Hamburg on designing technologies and policies simultaneously. And that's another aspect of that, because we're going into these new kind of technological landscapes with new possibilities, new complications and implications for users and people in everyday life. And we need to start working together here in these kind of policy design technology areas to better explore and understand what the guardrails can be here, how they can look like. So that's another option to do research.
And I see there are a lot of reflections and questions in the chat here, and I'll pick some out and maybe let you tell them yourself. Jonas, you have some kind of a question or reflection here in the chat. Would you like to ask it? Or,
yeah,
or tell
it
yourself?
was just what kind of, in your research or on this topic, what would be the suggestion to or tips or on to a municipality working with this question around how to even handle this problem, but still trying to adjust to this topic about elderly not be able to be onboarded or offboarded? What would they do? Because I see that a lot of money is put into projects where we can kind of extend and use more technique, but these questions are not really up for projects right now.
Very good question. So I work very closely here with the municipality of Emmen. It's about a 30,000 population municipality. And over the years, because they started to talk to me about digital transformation about 5 years ago, and how could they possibly do that, because they felt like within their own a director, ship and leadership, the topic wasn't there yet, and yet there were a couple of younger people in the municipality organization who said, like, we need to talk about this now, we need to kind of like move forward now. And it has led to the creation of a digital transformation group in that municipality, and one that is not on the technical side. That's the important part. They know their technical stuff, but they are more concerned about cultural change and about ways of exploring the use of digital transformation. And the role that I have there is really to remind them and support them that they are shaping their digital transformation for their municipality, rather than having to wait for Ernst & Young or someone else to tell them what to do. And so they have created this team, and they have hired 2 externals. One of them is a former police director. The other one is a data viz, I guess. And they are really going into the organization, doing actually design research, doing interviews, understanding what are the issues for the people in the organization from that to start with. And they are constantly also bringing in their own experience and starting to bridge that. It's not, it's still a work in progress, but it's very encouraging to see that, especially on a municipal level, people are beginning to embrace those kind of insights, those kind of research methods that we're recommending to generate insights, and that they're beginning to develop in-house capabilities for that kind of work. So I'm not sure if it answers your question completely.
But yeah, that's a good reflection. Yeah, thank you.
And I see that Alison have 2 questions or reflections in the chat, but maybe you will ask them yourself, Alison, or have some kind of discussion around them.
Yeah, I'm just Sabine, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you. I guess the first one is the whole emphasis on digital devices. Their lifespan is effectively 2 years. The emphasis is always upgrading, and I guess in a way there's a mindset there about how we just consider physical devices as well as the software. I mean, the emphasis is always on the new, but actually I have a very elderly parents, and the idea that even a small change of an interface or the way that your screen is configured is actually, is unsettling. So, I mean, in terms of just how companies are orientated, it's such I would say, a small thing, but a big mind shift. What are your thoughts on that?
And what you're describing is exactly one of the reasons and motivations for me to pursue this kind of work. I think, again, going back to the Polytechnico summer school, I really enjoyed working with the students there. You can tell because we had this chance to dig a little deeper in this 1 week. And what I found fascinating, they did exactly what you just described. They did a little bit of user research, and they reported on this one participant, an elderly man, who they said, like, look, he's not looking for WhatsApp. Let's take WhatsApp. He's looking for the green button, and it's the green button on the first screen, and that green button takes him to the yellow arrow, and the yellow arrow and has to be in the same place. And so once the green button changes in shape, in form, in whatever, or location on his interface, he's lost. Once the yellow button doesn't work, I mean, it's a very different way of thinking. And I think that's maybe also a response to Fergus, what do you do with research and stuff? I think we need to do more research on how elderly actually function with that. Yes, Alison.
There is a sustainability issue. I mean, one of my kids kept their Apple iPhone for 8 years, but he had to change it because he couldn't actually access any banking, so it's not just about the elderly. It's actually about how we're even treating the world in terms of our appetite for always needing new devices. And I mean, we've had these discussions for years within design, and it feels strange that we're still having them in one sense. And I go, it sort of leads a slightly different question I have, because it's just also with the digital, we always talk about them as this panacea, and we have great visions of the future. The thing is, we have existing structures which are frankly broken within the UK. I can't speak for the rest of Europe, but with an aging population, and there are costs that you don't see elderly people being seen as an investment in any way. We've just had this week somebody paying themselves 21 million, who was head of a whole private company of care homes, which they've all failed hitting basic standards for dementia patients. And yet we're talking about digital technologies and Ernst & Young. Where is this is being layered onto systems which are predicated on really, I mean, outmoded, inappropriate. I mean, you choose a range of words. So I guess how do we have this digital technology which isn't actually being used almost as a sticking plaster?
Yeah. You're asking a very fundamental question. I certainly can't provide a reasonable answer for that. I can give you some of my thoughts. There's a larger challenge to the economic model. And that's not stuck on digital public services or on England or anything. It's actually, I mean, and in that regard, it's very interesting to observe the economic forum at the World Economic Forum in Davos right now, because of course that is where such a shift would have to start to take hold. And what I can say is that there are now more efforts to include a different kind of economic model. We know we're hitting the roads, but unfortunately you have people on this planet who will milk this cow until it has to go to the slaughterhouse, and the slaughterhouse is near, but people will be milking it. So that is my view on these things. But what I do know is that we can have an impact, or what I hope, that's why I'm in design education, or in education per se, is that we can encourage and motivate and support a generation for whom this is much more relevant than for us. I mean, that is something we should also understand. I mean, I can philosophize about digital public services, and I'll probably survive whatever comes at me. But what happens to my son or my niece? These things are developing right now. These systems are manifesting right now. But by the time that they're my age, what kind of agency do they still have? What kind of ability do they still have? So for me, it's also an effort to intervene in this demographic shift where the young, I mean, let's face it, you talked about the economic models, but let's face it, with the young, in most European countries, if you maintain the current democratic system, the young will lose out in 20 years because there's simply not enough young people to overvote or outvote the older generations. So, and I think we need to be more proactive about instilling that kind of reality and thought into current young generations. So my students have to hear that, because it's them who will be part of that. And it's something we kind of know, but we're not living it. We're not enabling people to take action now. And I think there's really something about taking action now, just as it is with climate, which is also important. But this is part of the whole deal. So not a good answer for a very big question.
Really good point. Thank you.
Thank you.